My name is Liz Pemberton, and my role at That Nursery Life is the diversity and inclusion officer, individual, and I've got a real keen interest in just making sure that everybody's part of the conversation when it comes to the early years sector. My background is in nursery management and now in anti-racist training for the sector, actually. So I feel that it's quite a nice, natural string to add to my bow. And interests outside of this include lots of reading, a bit more drinking than I should be because we're in lockdown, but also just kind of getting involved in lots of activism work with regards to really getting into conversations and practical advice for the sector to strengthen my training and consultancy role. So the reason being, it's a family business. So my mum started the business in the late 80s. So it's always kind of been a part of what we have done as a family. But I kind of got a keen interest in looking at what makes people tick, what makes a team, and what makes people feel like they belong in that team. I guess community values. So I was really interested in how those things transfer onto children and young people and developing their sense of belonging and togetherness, and also the kind of knowledge and care element of what's passed on to children from the people who are responsible for caring for them. So I'd always had a keen interest, I guess, in people and in communities, and how the two of those things can merge when we are looking at the development of children. Definitely with TNL, my biggest excitement is around seeing how this can really grow in terms of just involving lots and lots of different kinds of people, really different kinds of people, in a conversation about how the sector can grow. And when we talk about difference, that we are not excluding race in that conversation, we're not excluding sexuality, we're not excluding gender expression, we're looking at all of the intersections that people sit in and how their value contribution can make for a richer environment for everybody. Because I think if everybody is set the same, if we're in an echo chamber and we're existing in that all the time, nothing new will come through. So I'm really keen to make sure that all of the marginalised voices, are being heard. So in July of this year, I set up the Black Nursery Manager Limited, which is a training and consultancy company which focuses primarily on inclusion, specifically about race, and specifically looking at how that conversation is opened up within the sector. So being a Black woman, I'm leading the conversations, I'm leading the training, and I'm thinking about ways in which wider society impacts Black children, brown children from South Asian heritage, and also East and Southeast Asian children, particularly in this climate with coronavirus. We know that that particular community is really at the receiving end of a lot of disgusting racist attacks, and how that kind of filters through for the children of those families. So I'm opening up those conversations because practitioners in the early years sector have to be aware of that and have to be really aware of the active role that they need to take in ensuring that everybody feels like they belong. So when we talk about diversity, that's one strand of it, yes, but thinking about belonging and making people who are born in this country, who are British, irrespective of what they look like or the colour of their skin or the language that they speak, their contribution to this society is just as valued. But embedding that from the early years is key. So when I set up the consultancy company, the training company, it was about making sure I was getting into as many different pockets of, early years provisions within the sector as possible. Of course, there has been a barrier because this is the UK. We're still not used to having conversations about the fact that, there is a problem with racism in the country. So of course, I've met some pushback from white practitioners when I'm having conversations about inclusion and belonging and race and anti-racist practice, because there's this massive denial about it. And I think when we think about where we are as a country, we are not used to hearing the voices of the marginalized speaking out about the oppression, speaking out about racism, and being so, I guess, unapologetic about it. And that's what I'm doing within the sector. But I do like to think about the focus and where we are and make sure that it's really relevant and very current. And that's why my focus at the moment has been East and Southeast Asian communities within the UK and the children who are a part of that community, who are British born, thinking about their journey and their experience in the early years settings at the moment. So I guess we talk about tolerance a lot. That's a word that's used a lot when we're talking about inclusion and multiculturalism. I want to talk about tokenistic gestures and why we need to really dispel this myth around tokenism being a good thing. You know, we celebrated Chinese New Year, we celebrated Eid, we celebrated Diwali, we've made a candle, it's fine. We've got a little Chinese restaurant set up, it's fine. We've done the work. The children know. The children don't know, because what does that actually translate into? And when we're thinking about how we embed this knowledge for children, are we engaging with the local communities that surround the early years provision, or are we thinking about people from the community coming in and, you know, children going out? The beauty of this is that it adds to a richness, a tapestry of kind of letting children know that everybody in the world has an equal stake in, you know, contributing to society, contributing to community. And I think when we show children the importance of valuing each other irrespective of their differences, it makes for a kind of all-round better experience for everybody. It isn't to, I guess, assert one group over another, but it is to search for some kind of level of equity rather than equality, and a level of inclusion, you know, rather than, I guess, tolerance. And we have to really make sure that the narrative is being pushed forward so that children can see themselves reflected, that they feel good about the reflection that they see, and that we also don't just think about limiting it to resources, you know, having some books with different coloured characters in them. It moves so much further into mindset, dialogue, thought processes around how we, I guess, structure or facilitate conversations around difference, but also being explicit when we're thinking about how we ensure we have a zero tolerance approach when it comes to managing and calling out racism as well, if inappropriate and racist language is being used. So I think obviously we are in a global crisis of COVID, and the sustainability of early years settings and the early years sector is really under a lot of pressure at the moment, as people are really thinking about their careers, they're thinking about the possibility of the business not being there anymore, and also what happens with a workforce which has historically been undervalued and underpaid, how that impacts morale, and also what it does for children who have been out of the early years setting for periods of time, if their families are not key workers, or if parents can no longer afford to send their children to nursery. You know, the concern really is just about continuity of provision for children who really need to be in nurseries, but also at the same time considering the well-being and the livelihood of the practitioners, the workforce, and nursery managers and nursery owners. These things are really critical at the moment, because we have to think about what this means in a year's time, in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time. This has added a massive disruption, you know, to people's lives and livelihood, but also to people's well-being. So I worry about the emotional and mental state of the sector as a whole. That's the practitioners, it's the parents, it's the children, it's the extended families. I worry about that and the impact that's going to have on the sector, not just now in the immediate present tense, but in the future as well. I think a good quality provision, and when I say good quality, of course, that is very subjective as well, but a setting that speaks to your needs as a child, a setting that speaks to the needs of the family, having a child involved in, brilliant interactions, brilliant play, activities that are going to stretch them and ensure that they have a really well-rounded view of the world outside of nursery is really instrumental in just preparing a nicer, better society. Things must get better, and the only way we can do that is start from very, very young in terms of influencing the mind of the under fives. And it means that if children have got access to that kind of provision and that kind of interaction, whatever that looks like in the many shapes and forms that the early years sector takes on, that variety, as I said earlier, it's really, really important to have a richness of that, because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. All children are different, as are all, individual adults. We are all different, but I think when we think about the way that the narrative is shaped about early years as a sector, as a workforce, we are often like the forgotten emergency service in a way. And the work that we do is absolutely instrumental. It's so valuable, it's so important, because we see how children thrive. Children are excited about coming to nursery, they're excited about being with their friends, they're excited about being with the practitioners, and all of those experiences add to, a happy, healthy child holistically as well. So I just think we cannot ever underestimate the power of early years provisions. I think on the back of, the second global crisis, which is racism, I think what's been really positive is that a lot of conversations have come up and a lot of kind of direction in terms of active work that needs to be done has actually been, I guess, considered and really engaged with for the first time in, well, certainly my time in the early years, which has been 16 years. I spent a lot of time always kind of reading articles and looking at, the framework that we have at the moment in terms of diversity, and not really seeing anything that was explicit in terms of it talking about tackling and managing racism and really like an anti-racist approach to what we are doing. I think before this global pandemic of racism, racism has always been a thing, it's always happened. I just think the rise of all of the things that had happened globally with the Black Lives Matter movement, with the murder of George Floyd, the murder of Breonna Taylor, I think that has given, unfortunately, an avenue for us to kind of now amplify the conversation, irrespective of what barriers are going to come up in the process. They always will. I think one good thing about where I can see the early years sector moving forward now is that there's a willingness to engage with this kind of rhetoric and conversation around what it is that we need to do as a collective, not just what white practitioners need to do or, what Black practitioners need to do, but how as a collective we are supporting one another's communities, how we are all allies to one another, and how we are looking at things as, a collaborative approach to, I guess, tackling what, has been ignored for a long, long time within our sector in particular. Well, I wish I could give you the answer in what I know is only going to be like a short amount of time. The thing is, there are a few things we need to consider. First of all, being racialized as white comes with lots of different caveats. That's the first thing. There are, things that we have to consider with race being a social construct, first of all, as well, and who decides that they get into that, band of what is quote unquote white and what is non-white. What is white passing? What does it mean to look white but you're not white? So that's the first thing. It's really kind of being racialized as white is something that practitioners have to explore, and that's where this overused phrase doing the work has come. It's been born out of this anti-racist movement, doing the work. I think having conversations is the very, very least that practitioners can be doing, but also considering these children are 5 and under, it's more about an environment and a mindset, isn't it? And I think this fear of getting things wrong is what's stopping people from having the conversations. White practitioners racialized as white, it's stopping them from having the conversations, and it shouldn't. And also semantics, so who's saying what? Have I said the right thing? Have I said the wrong thing? There are some clear, hard rules here. Don't use racial slurs. Don't use words that could potentially be offensive. If you're unsure about the word, go and find out what you should be saying. That it is not the responsibility of Black and non-white people of colour to be telling you what you should and shouldn't do. We are on the receiving end of racism. We are the victims of racism. The onus really is on practitioners who are racialised as white to go and find out for themselves. Google is free. That's my favourite response in my DMs. Google is free. However, when we're thinking about mindsets, we're thinking about resources in the early years, it's about moving away from perfectionism. That's the first thing I would say. Stop worrying about not being perfect. If you do the necessary reading, if you have the necessary conversations within a trusted friends group, within your family, hopefully if it's diverse, if it's not, when I say diverse, that racially diverse I'm specifically talking about here. If you are looking around your friends group and all of your friends look like you, there's a problem. It means that you actually need to go out and form meaningful relationships with people who do not look like you, who are not from the same racial group as you, because that will add to your ability to have the right kinds of conversations and create the right kinds of environments, so that we move away from early years practice being tokenistic. But we really have to start engaging with the language first of all, and not using that as a tool to stop conversations happening. But we can only do that when meaningful relationships are formed with people who do not look like us. That relationship at the core of everything, it's key. Before we move into being early years practitioners, we are people first. So we should seek to do that in our own personal lives, having meaningful relationships with people, because as I said, it's not a binary thing of, right, if you do this, this, and this, everything will be fine. Anti-racism, it's an ongoing, lifelong journey. And the work that I do in terms of delivering anti-racist training and consultancy, I always say this is legacy work, the results of which you probably won't see in your lifetime, but it's about setting the foundations to make sure that things can continue way after we've been we're gone. So the sad thing is, my mum started the business in the late 80s, like 87, and through her 30 plus year career, and we've had like a total of 4 nurseries at one time, 3 nurseries, now 2 nurseries. But as she has gone through this process of being a nursery owner, a business owner, but also a nursery manager, with regards to inclusion, with regards to diversity, with regards to anti-racist practice, not a lot has changed in that. Yes, the workforce might look more representative in our settings, because that's been something that we've made sure that we've always done, had a very, very diverse, culturally, racially, linguistically, a workforce that represents the children that we have had in our setting. But in terms of wider changes, and also systemically, the changes have been very, very few and, not impactful. the systems that operate to govern the early years sector, for example, if we look at, the regulatory body for the early years, it's still all white at the top, and nothing much in terms of difference as we kind of go through. So when we're looking at systems, we have to think about, these systems of change are something we need to start dismantling. We need to look at how we do what we need to do in order to have things not just filter from top down, from the bottom up. And the conversations that me and my mum have been having over, the entirety of her time within the sector is that change has to come with regards to inclusion and belonging and making people feel like they are a part of this, that childhood and early childhood and the sector is co-authored. It's a collective. Everybody's doing this together. It's not, I would say it should be moving away from being transactional and more relational, because that's what we want to have. And I think having organisations like TNL really help us to drive that vehicle, because it enables everybody to have a vested interest and a voice and a contribution to this wider narrative about the early years, so that we can actually see some more radical change in terms of what we are doing for the future of the sector.